I want to talk about what I see as a different version of the Fermi paradox. Intelligence, if you're right about it, is a very simple, easily scalable, copy and pastable thing, and it literally gets you everything you want. It achieves all of your biological goals. And only one species with a nervous system has fully invested in this. Where are all the intelligent animals?
Hey, everybody, welcome to Doom Debates. Today I'm speaking with David Pinsof. He is one of the co creators of the wildly popular game Cards Against Humanity. He's currently a social science researcher at UCLA Social Minds Lab, researching political beliefs and status hierarchies with the lens of evolutionary psychology. And he writes a blog called Everything is Bullshit. The reason we're talking today is because he's working on a post asking whether AI doom is bullshit. Welcome, David.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. So I had the opportunity to skim through a draft of your post. And the first thing I noticed is that it starts off pretty charitable to the AI doomers. Like, you point out a lot of things that I think are positive. So maybe you can start off with the good stuff, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of the impetus for the post is that I have a lot of respect for AI doomers. They're some of my favorite intellectuals. I'm actually a fan of Less Wrong. I was into Eliezer Yudkowsky, very much into Robin Hanson, Scott Alexander. I listen to 80,000 Hours. I'm a fan of EA as well. And really, the impetus to write the post came from kind of trying to resolve my own cognitive dissonance about here's, a group of people that I really intellectually respect who are right and I agree with on pretty much everything. And here's this one case where I seem to really disagree with them, and I'm really skeptical of the claims being put forward. And that's part of why I was interested in this topic. I just wanted to get to the bottom of how a group of people who were so smart and thoughtful could be so wrong in my view. And maybe I'm the one who's wrong. I'm open to that possibility too. That's part of another part of why I wanted to write this piece, just to see if anyone could tell me where I went wrong. So yeah, it's kind of an odd topic for me. And then I'm a psychologist by training, evolutionary psychologist. I write about bullshit and the subtle social games we play. But I recently came up on my 1 year anniversary of the blog, and I asked my readers if there was any sort of weird, outside my comfort zone topic that they would be interested in reading about. And AI doomerism was one of them, and a plurality of my readers wanted to get my take on it. So that was another one of the impetuses for me writing this. And I was happy to get a lot of really awesome feedback from high level AI doomers such as yourself, and I'm currently in the process of editing the piece in response to that feedback. And I'm looking
That's
forward
awesome.
to seeing if we can get to the bottom of our disagreement.
Likewise. So, one thing we do here at Doom Debates and as a rationalist is I try to separate my opinion of somebody's object level views on a topic, separate that from, are they being like a good faith participant in high quality discourse? Are they meeting the standards of discourse? And so far, I think you're doing a great job, because I think your article shows that you've talked to doomers and tried to understand their position. And when you posted on Twitter, you solicited feedback and you were quick to respond to me and you're engaging with me. So that definitely puts you in the upper echelon of people coming out, because a lot of the non-doomers come out and they're like, we shouldn't even take these arguments seriously. We should dismiss them. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say another reason why I wanted to write the piece is because I felt that the quality of AI doomer criticism is so low. There are just so many dumb, lazy takes on the topic, and I wanted to sort of fill the void in having sort of a more smart, educated critique of it. And hopefully, I'll be able to pull it off. We'll see.
Oh, yeah. All right. So let's start with the bottom line. Where did you net out after doing all this research? What's your P Doom?
Something pretty close to zero, I'd say.
So I'm just curious, when you say pretty close to zero, are we talking sub 1% or maybe just like sub 5%?
Sub 1%.
Wow. Okay. I always feel like sub 1% is pretty hard to defend, pretty obviously, just because it's like, look, even nuclear war, right? Even extinction by nuclear war is a roughly 1% a year type of risk. So you're really not crediting AI risk with even 1%?
I'm happy to be talked up to it. I do think that it's easy to give oneself a false sense of precision with these kinds of numbers, and that we just kind of pull these numbers out of our ass. I'm reluctant to try to get too precise about it. Basically, I'm skeptical. I don't think we're going to get killed by AI. I don't know how to represent
Mm-hmm.
that mathematically. I think we can too easily, point to a number and create the illusion of confidence. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, but it's low enough that it's like when we're making policy decisions, we shouldn't even have like a plan B for the like AI goes rogue and kills everybody scenario. It just shouldn't even be on the game board, basically.
yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so hit me with your first point of potential disagreement.
Sure. So I think at the heart of every AI Doomer piece I've read, and maybe I'm missing something. I'm open to that. But at the heart of it is this core assumption that intelligence is one thing, that it's this one optimizing power, as you call it, or a blob of compute, as Scott Alexander calls it, or a blob of learning. It's this general purpose thing that helps you achieve literally any goal. It improves all your skills. Essentially, the more of it you have, the more you can just get whatever you want. That's basically the intuition here that I'm seeing in a lot of AI Doomer articles. Sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it's explicit. But I really wanted to, call out that assumption and say, hey, that's an assumption you're making, and that needs to be defended.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of the first point that I tackle in the piece. And
Great. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, let's talk about it.
sure.
Um, So I think that that's a pretty good characterization of what I would claim. Like, I do
Mhm,
claim that intelligence is one thing in a lot of important senses. So let me make it more precise what I would claim.
mhm,
Optimization is one thing, it's a lens that explains a lot of different scenarios in terms of what algorithms are doing. So, for example, if you have an AI that beats you at chess, I would call that an instance of optimization because the winning states of chess are such a small fraction of the possible chessboards, and the winning moves are the sequence of winning moves is an exponentially small fraction of all the different sequences of moves you can get. Like, there's no way you would ever win at chess if you're just trying to guess moves or do a brute force search. So somehow we've targeted the winning configuration in chess, which is a
mhm,
tiny target in an exponential search space. And whenever you see somebody doing that, somehow reaching a tiny target that a naive algorithm couldn't reach in a huge space, that's what I call optimization. And I do
mhm,
think that talking about cross domain optimization, where you talk about all kinds of different exponential search spaces and you draw a connection, like it's not just chess. Look, when a car is able to self drive, the sequence of actions it's taking on the steering wheel to safely have a Waymo car drive you around San Francisco, I would say that that's an instance of optimization. And if you
mhm.
look at the accident rate compared to humans, you could even argue that it's superhuman optimization because it's like something like 2 to 3 times already fewer accidents per mile than humans. So I think it's hard to even argue against the fact that this analysis is logically valid, right? To just point to a small target at an exponential search space. So would you at least follow that so far?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between optimality and intelligence. So yeah, I agree. For any goal, there are more or less optimal ways of achieving it, and you can do the mathematical analysis to see what's going to optimally get you your goal. You can do rational choice analysis, decision theory. If it's a social problem, you can do game theory. And so I agree that there are different optimal strategies for different games, either games against other players or games against nature or the universe itself. So yeah, optimality is a thing, but I think it takes very different shapes depending on what is being optimized and the nature of the game being played. I think that might be where the disagreement lies.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So you could be like, look, there's a bunch of different problems, and all of the problems do have this unifying high level structure, or, at least through this one lens where they are all search problems, right? So, like, searching through an exponential space in a way that's non-trivial, not a brute force search, but like some kind of intelligent search, right? These are all intelligent searches, but your claim is that you just need different intelligence depending on the search, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close to what I would say. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I do think that this actually is a good crux of your
Mhm,
disagreement with the Doomers. It's probably one of the biggest, most important cruxes. And you do have some smart allies on your side. I don't think
mhm,
every non-Doomer is on your side, but certainly Robin Hanson doesn't see intelligence as quote unquote one thing. I think he'd be cheering on what you're saying right now.
mhm,
Now, let me throw out an analogy that I find quite powerful to my own thinking, which is the analogy of computation. So
Mhm,
maybe you can at least admit that I can win in the analogous argument before we get back to the real argument. So the analogous
mhm.
argument is to draw an analogy between intelligence and computation. It seems to me like you're looking at it's 1970 and you're looking at different video game circuit boards. You're like, oh, Pong works like this, Breakout works like this. They're all just different circuits. And when you want to play a different game, you need a different circuit. And then, flash forward half a century. And today we're like, yeah, these are just all computations. You just load the software onto the computer chip and you run it. And it would be insane to go build a dedicated circuit board to a video game because it's just clear that when you want to run a video game, you just do it on a computer chip because it's computation. So are you buying the analogy at least?
Um, yeah, I think computation is a very broad, abstract thing. You can do all kinds of computations on a circuit board. But to me, at least, what's ringing my alarm bells is the assumption that therefore all video games are the same, right? So the
Right.
structure and the code of each video game is going to be very, very different, and the goals you might have for designing one type of game or one type of experience, and the criteria for success or failure are going to be very different from game to game. So just because there's this abstract notion of computation
Mhm.
that you can implement on a circuit board doesn't, to me, suggest that all video games are the same, or that you could have a
Yeah, yeah,
general
yeah.
video game
Which is fair,
designing
right? I mean, it's
ability.
not
Yeah,
proving, right? The
yeah,
analogy isn't a proof, absolutely,
yeah.
right? But it sure seems like a strong intuition pump because doesn't it seem like you could be standing here in 1970 being like, look, we're going to have all these different circuit boards in our home, and when you want to do a new application, you're going to want to design a different circuit board for it. You see what I'm saying? I just want to make sure that you're in a mind space where you can anticipate that no, the circuit boards are going to unify.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow the analogy. Yeah, I mean, like, so math would be another example. So, like, all mathematical operations can be implemented in our number system, right? Um,
Right.
so that's, but 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 math is there are different types of math that are very different. That doesn't mean that all math is
Yeah, yeah,
fundamentally the
yeah.
same,
No,
right?
for sure, right? I mean, and as you say, like software programs are different too, right? And they connect to reality differently.
Right.
But like, so basically, I would claim that the way we saw convergence in video games, where it's like at the end of the day, because they're all computation, the architecture that you end up using to implement them is a general universal architecture. And I would claim pretty confidently that what you're going to see with software is going to show the same convergence that we saw with computation and also the same convergence that we saw with the human brain, because the human brain suddenly is this general intelligence. Evolution by natural selection decided, you know what? Let's just stop having subroutines. Let's just stop having hard coded reflexes. Let's just build a general intelligence if we want to, solve all these problems in the animal kingdom. And yeah, the species can randomly go to the moon. We're going to give it the kind of intelligence that lets it go to the moon. We're just going to throw that in for free. You see what I'm saying? So we're observing convergence both in computer chips and in evolution, the fact that it popped out the human brain. And one more place we're observing the convergence is if you look at AIs, the AIs are actually getting broader. So a chatbot AI, the amount of topics that you can ask about, that is the broadest AI we've ever had. And also board games. You're seeing the same AI train on multiple different board games and beat previous AIs at all those different board games. So like, I hope you're seeing some amount of convergence here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you have a problem that is best solved through trial and error, and you have a better trial and error learning system, then yeah, you're going to do better on a lot of different trial and error problems. And if you have enough data and you have the right kinds of trials and the right kinds of feedback and the right kinds of errors and you have the right system in place, yeah, you can get good at a lot of different problems. But each problem is going to have different types of trials, different types of things you need to do, different types of feedback, different
Mhm.
criteria for success or failure, different um, optimal strategies, and different types of available data. Like the internet, for example, has a lot of easily accessible data in the form of words and images. But not every problem is like that. Not every problem has a lot of easily accessible data. Like if I want to solve the problem of becoming the president, I can't simulate the entire United States of America and all the millions of people in it and run that simulation millions of times to see which presidential strategy is going to be the best. That data is just not available to me. So while
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
that
Okay.
type of brute force, like uh, pumping a system full of tons of data and learning by trial and error what works and what doesn't, yeah, that's a pretty
Mhm.
effective solution to a lot of different problems. But I just don't see that that's going to be the solution to all problems
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, yeah. So I think that we're starting to shift to a different argument, which I think is fascinating. But let's try to package up. Let's try to isolate the argument of is intelligence really one thing? Because it sounds
Mhm.
like you're basically saying, okay, I agree that there's a trend that maybe at some point you'll have the same AI core that out of the box it can self-drive and it can play board games and it can do natural language really well. But that still doesn't mean that it's going to take over the world. And we can have that conversation. But it sounds like you are potentially conceding the point of like, okay, intelligence is one thing in the sense of like you can just unpack your new AI and set it to a problem as long as the problem has a feedback loop. Is that basically what you're saying?
As long as you have sufficient data to train it and you have the right behavioral repertoire with which to respond to the data and the right kind of feedback system, and you've correctly identified the criteria for success and failure. Yeah, if you have all those things in place, yeah, you can get pretty good at that thing.
Okay, so maybe what you want to say is that the training processes required to succeed in different domains, they're so varied that like sure, you could take the same brain, you could take the same like raw neuron core of intelligence and you can apply it to different domains, but you're going to have so many different training processes and the more power you want over the universe, the longer the training process is going to be, so you're never just going to have like an AI take over the world.
I would, sort of. I guess the core claim would just be that different problems require different solutions. And the strategy for solving one problem is going to be different from the strategy for solving a different problem.
Mhm.
And the types of training data you need to solve one problem are going to be different from the types of training data you need to solve another problem. And the accessibility of that kind of data is going to be different, and the unpredictability of that data is going to be different. So if you think about chess, it's a very rigid system where there's a finite number of moves, finite number of spaces on the board. But not all problems in the real world are like that. Some problems are unpredictable, chaotic, and the type of and you can't sort of use the same strategies that you'd use in chess as you'd use in, say, the social world or the political world, where there's lots of unpredictable, dynamic, strange things that happen, where agents are actually actively trying to be unpredictable and outmaneuver you.
Mhm, mhm. You know, a lot of people bring up this idea of like finite versus infinite, and that feels to me like not quite what they really mean. It just seems to me like it's a matter of degree because, like, sure, chess is finite, but it's much larger than the universe, right? So, like, does it really matter that it caps out at this, 10 to the 80th or whatever, right? As opposed to capping out at infinity? Does that make the difference? Or is the difference just that the branch factor is just even larger than chess in many applications? Isn't it just a matter of degree?
Um, Maybe. Yeah. I guess I would return to the point of like, you can train a system to predict words and give sensible responses to prompts really well. We've seen that with ChatGPT. Um, but right now, at least, you can't train a system to become the president, right?
Hmm.
And so, what's the difference between those two problems, between predicting words and becoming the president?
Right.
Obviously, there is a difference there.
Yeah, no,
As you become
absolutely.
better
Yeah.
at predicting words, you don't also magically become better at becoming the president, right?
Yeah,
And
so
and I would
I think
argue
it's a
that
matter of
as you
degree.
become,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and as you become, so if as you become better at predicting words, you don't become better at becoming the president, then
Hmm.
why should we assume that as you become better at predicting words, you'll become better at hacking into the CIA or manufacturing
Well,
nanobots or murdering humans
if
or
you make a
whatever? Like,
scale, I think
yeah,
GPT-4 is better at becoming the president than anything that's come before it. It feels like progress toward becoming the president.
I would disagree there. One of the big stumbling blocks to becoming the president is you need to be a person with a legal identity and a citizen of the country in which you're running for political office. So right off the bat, there's this very hard barrier that GPT has not even surmounted.
Sure, but I mean, if that's really the only problem, isn't it at least making progress toward if you ask it, hey, how would an AI go about becoming president? Wouldn't it's I actually wouldn't be surprised if GPT-4 or Claude or whatever would tell you like, well, I might use a person to help me out, and then I would tell the person what to do. I mean, I feel like even that kind of reasoning is very close, if it's not already doing it today. So doesn't it seem like it's getting? I'm not saying it's going to be president tomorrow, but I'm just saying compared to 5 years ago, doesn't it at least seem like if it were on the path to becoming president, isn't this kind of what it would look like to be on the path?
No, because I think there's a very big difference between giving a sensible response to the question, how do I become president, and actually becoming the president, actually behaving in the world and doing
Hmm.
things and responding to feedback and perceiving things. responding to setbacks and overcoming obstacles and committing to the plan over a long stretch of time. Like that is very different from just giving a plausible text response to the question, "How do I become the president?"
Okay, fair enough. Let's bring it back to one of your more key points for the essay. So you can pick what to hit on next.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess the next thing it's somewhat related, but I think it actually can be decoupled. It's the idea that intelligence is on sort of one single continuum that encompasses like all animals and humans are just really high up on this intelligence continuum and ants are just super dumb and maybe rats are a bit smarter and dolphins are a bit smarter and we can just sort of rank all animals based on their general purpose intelligence. I think that's another assumption I see in a lot of doomer literature, and I think they kind of need that assumption because if
Yeah.
general intelligence or superintelligence is in the future, if it's coming for us, then we need to be moving toward it along some kind of continuum. If we were moving toward it along thousands of different continua, the odds of us converging on all those continua would be very low. So AI doomers really need something like one single continuum that we're progressing along in order to postulate this future general
Yep.
intelligence.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And I think that's an interesting discussion to have. So I see it as an important observation that
Mhm.
we as humans can go head to head against any other species in any niche, right? That's just, it's like, what do you make of that
Can we?
observation? Because that's unprecedented for the animal kingdom, right? Or any kingdom of life. You can't just take one species and have them dominate every other niche. So what's going on there?
Can we go head to head against? I don't know. I mean, like mosquitoes are really annoying. They spread disease, and we haven't wiped them out yet. Nematodes outnumber us 57 billion to one. Many species have
Yes.
done better under humans than
Right. I
rather
mean,
than
so
worse.
it is a little bit subtle, right? Because what I would want to argue is that, like, okay, to the extent that you can be like, oh my God, ants have more total biomass, if that's the case. I'm not sure who wins there, but
Yeah.
like, whenever you have a criteria like that, usually what I would say, which I agree, I have to explain it, and I would just say it's a combination of like we didn't care enough and we're not smart enough, but we're getting there, right? Or like, like give us another 100 years
I,
of technological progress. Like, I don't see ants randomly crawling around the earth at that point.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't. I think if we really put our minds to it, we could probably wipe out ants, or we could figure something out. I think the
Right, like a
reason why
gene
we're not doing
drive,
it
or
is
at
just
least we
because
could
of
we give him a blow. We could at least beat him in the biomass game, right? Even if we're not
maybe.
100%.
I think it's more of a cost benefit analysis that just like the costs of wiping out all ants would just be enormous and just not
Right,
worth the
right.
benefits to us, right?
Okay, okay. But I guess so what I'm getting at is like, okay, yeah, we can have this discussion. How effectively are we going to wipe out ants? But like, have that discussion with a beaver. The beaver will be like, if it doesn't involve building dams, I'm out, right? The beaver's not
Mhm.
even going to be having a strategic discussion with you about how to wipe out the ants. It's not right. So like, what do you make of this difference?
The difference between beavers and
No,
humans.
the difference between the fact is you can sit down in the war room with fellow
Mhm.
humans and be like, how do we wipe out the ants? You can have that discussion about every species and we're going to have a fighting chance, right? So let me not say, okay, we beat every species decisively, but like clearly it's something that we can take a stab at and we might succeed, right? Give us 100 years, give us something like we're getting there, okay? But put any other species in the war room, they're just going to be like dicking around. They're going to be useless, right? So like what is your takeaway from that?
I don't know. I mean, viruses have given us a run for our money. They're doing pretty well. We haven't gotten rid of them yet, and they're extremely dumb. They're millions of times. They don't even have a brain. Um,
Right. So yeah, I
so
mean, they've
you'd
posed a
expect us to
challenge, right? But
be
at the end of the
totally
day, who's
demolishing viruses because they have no brains at all, and we have the biggest brains in the animal kingdom, which suggests to me that you need something more than just. That there are some problems that you don't really need a brain for, that are
no,
just
no, no,
best
for sure,
solved.
for sure. But the
Yeah,
question I'm asking is, so in the case of viruses, like once again, maybe we won't fully eliminate the virus, but at least we can get in a war room and we can take effective action, right? We can neutralize it, we can do something. Whereas you
sure.
bring in any other animal into that war room, or bring another virus into the war room, right? There's why? How come every other species is useless to come into the war room and strategize how to take out viruses? How come it's only humans?
No, that's a fair point. I will accept that point that if we wanted to, you know, wipe out another species, if we were in conflict with another species, an existential conflict or whatever, then humans would probably stand a better chance of winning than any other species locked in an
Yeah, I mean,
existential
even that
conflict.
framing of our species is in an existential conflict, right? Tell that
Yeah.
to a dog, they're just going to bark, right?
Oh,
They're not
totally.
going to, they're not even going to understand.
Yeah. So I accept that point. Yeah.
Okay, so That's and I mean, it did seem like you came in saying like, why are we so like human chauvinistic thinking we're the best? But I feel like that's why we're the best, right? Because we just have something that we overturns the game board. Like the way you normally think of natural selection, the whole concept of a niche, the concept of ecological competition, it's different when you have a general intelligence on the scene, right? It's a different ballgame now.
You're implicitly assuming that intelligence is one thing. You said we have something that other animals don't. I would challenge that and say we have many things that other animals
Okay,
don't.
okay.
Yeah.
I see
Uh,
what you're saying, but then isn't it weird that we have all of these things at once and they're all localized in a single species and there's no runner-up species, right? Like people say dolphins are smart. Okay, I've never seen a single research paper from a dolphin. Like, you'd think there would be at least a few.
yeah, and I think that's more understandable under my view than your view. Because if intelligence was this complicated, multifaceted thing consisting of many parts, it makes sense that only one species in the animal kingdom over 4 billion years managed to hit on this lucky combination of traits, right? It would make sense that we're the only ones and that we don't see
Yeah,
intelligent animals all
but
around
the
us.
amount of bits of genetic
But let me
information.
just finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
If intelligence was one simple learning algorithm that you could just copy and paste endlessly, and the more of it you have, just the more you can just get whatever you want, then it's really surprising that humans are the only intelligence on the planet. That is a really profoundly surprising uh, empirical
Right.
finding. Yeah.
So regardless of how you're defining that term, I'm trying
Yeah.
to argue that you just should be surprised by the low level observations that you're seeing. Like, you see what I'm saying? Put the term aside. I just think you should be surprised by your observations, like the
Which
war room observation.
observation?
For example, the observation that if you want to fight a war against a species, you don't need to recruit any other species. You just get humans in the room, right? Like, I think that's a surprising observation.
Uh, I, I suppose, sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of surprising observations like that. Like, so you were saying, like, okay, well, we just natural selection just stumbled on one brain that had all the different pieces in a single brain. But now I'm saying, well, that observation is surprising too because compared to other apes, the genetic information that differentiates our brain, if you want to build a human brain instead of an ape brain, you need maybe a megabyte of genetic difference, probably less. Right. So
Yeah,
probably
I
much
would
less because
dispute
we're just
that. I
talking
think
about like, a million years of differentiation. I don't even think that's a megabyte. Right. So
yeah, I would
how did
dispute
that small
that.
differentiation make such a big impact of like amassing all these different types of intelligence?
Right. I would just dispute that it actually is a small differentiation because a lot of the information in our genome is epigenetic. It's regulating pre-existing instructions,
Yeah.
and a lot of
So
complexity you can get just by just duplicating certain sections of the genome through the
so talking
epigenome.
about epigenetics actually doesn't affect my point because there's a speed limit to how much information complexity natural selection can add to when I say genes I'm talking about whatever you want to call the unit of reproduction, genes plus epigenetic. You can't just have natural selection put tons of megabytes into it in a small amount of time. It has to go very slow and it also has to be maintained. So you can't just it doesn't just build up. A lot of it leaks out. So you have to use your optimization power to keep the information there if you like the information. Like there's just a speed limit and there's a total information limit. So it's pretty clear that no matter how you analyze it, there's a small information delta between apes and humans.
I would disagree with that. I think there is this line that I see a lot in the AI doomer subculture that humans are just chimps with like bigger learning blobs. I think if you were to put that hypothesis forward in a room of evolutionary anthropologists or evolutionary biologists or evolutionary psychologists, they would laugh at you. I think that
Yeah,
is
so I
not,
mean
yeah,
that's a qualitative statement, right? So I don't want
yeah,
to I don't want to make that statement because it's qualitative, it's vague. The
yeah.
statement that I do want to make is if you just measure in terms of bits of information, if you compare one animal specification to the human specification, you're going to see a very small delta in the specification because there weren't that many years of divergence, right? So that's just like logically true that you just can't have a wildly different specification when there's only been a million years of divergence.
It's more than a million. Our last common ancestor with chimps, I believe, is a little over 6 million years ago. Um, but even
Okay, I
so, I
mean
think we
that
got a
may be, but
huge head
it's just
start
not a
with.
lot, right?
It depends on what you mean by a lot. It's kind of subjective. And also, we had a huge head
As a
start, I think.
ballpark estimate, right? 1 megabyte I think is on the high end of a ballpark estimate of how much information it takes to specify a human and not an ape.
Yeah, I think we'd have to get into the specific uh, papers or data points you're drawing from, and get into the nitty gritties on that. Because
Okay, I mean
I yeah.
the reason I'm bringing it up, right, is because
Mhm.
it's I'm just seeing a contradiction between like your point is that like humans just have this amazing grab bag in our heads, right? We
Yeah.
nailed all these different intelligences, and I'm just saying, okay, but the apes don't even seem close, right? If like an ape isn't doing 90% of the productive output of a human, an ape is really just dicking around useless, right? Like, and so how is a small difference suddenly giving us this giant bag of tricks that no other animal has?
Right. Well, I don't think the grab bag is solely in our heads. I think it's also out of our heads and in the realm of cultural evolution and economic and technological evolution. I think one of the big superpowers that humans have is enabling a whole new kind of evolution, which is cultural evolution. And that we can get forms of evolution that happen across generations. We can pool knowledge. We can divide labor. And so I think a lot of our intelligence, if not most of it, comes from this second form of evolution called cultural evolution.
Mhm.
But I do think we need a specific grab bag of cognitive abilities to even make cultural evolution possible. So we need not only a cognitive grab bag of social cognitive adaptations to enable cultural evolution, but we also need a variety of different cultural adaptations for solving specific cultural problems and technological problems and economic problems and so on.
Do you read a lot of Robin Hanson on this topic? Because I think that he would agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Robin Hanson. I generally am aligned with him on a lot of things. So, yeah, it's possible I got some of this from, but I think Robin Hanson probably just got it from just reading the literature in evolutionary
Hmm,
social
hmm.
science, which is
Yeah.
basically the
So
standard view. Yeah.
let me try to make your point that you just made because it's like so I basically said how can you explain humans having all these diverse abilities all of a sudden all these diverse intelligences, right, domain specific intelligences, we got them all, when there's only been maybe a megabyte of additional information in our genome and our epigenetics. Well, you could basically answer that I'm not counting this additional information accumulation that's happening with culture, right? It's written down and
Correct.
it's passed orally and it's in the RAM,
Yes.
so it's not in the ROM, it's in the RAM. So you could make that argument.
Correct.
Okay, so then here's
Yes.
my response to that. If let's say there's a newborn, okay, and he's raised in
Mhm.
society, so the newborn has the information in his brain, let's say 1 megabyte difference from the apes. And
Mhm.
yeah, the newborn is going to go to school and learn like another few megabytes of information. And then that newborn is going to slot into some cultural role. Like the newborn's going to have a job and the job is
Mhm.
complex. So the
Mhm.
weird thing for me is, doesn't it seem like every other species is not even close to being able to like be a newborn, take their current genome, learn a few megabytes of information and then be useful? Like, how come no
Of
other
course.
species seems to be anywhere near the ability to do that, and humans are?
It seems like I have a good answer to that and you don't, right? My answer is
Well,
that it's a really
yeah.
rare combination of abilities that only happen once in our 4 billion year history. What's your answer?
Okay, so I think just to repeat what I'm hearing, which I think is
Yeah.
also Robin Hanson's claim, which is basically saying like, look, humans they do have one trick, but the one trick isn't intelligence. The one trick is cultural absorption power. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't call it cultural absorption power. I would call it a bunch of different things. I would call it, social learning, cooperation, division of labor, pedagogy, communication, innovation, feedback, memory, things like that.
I mean, but a lot of the things you listed are actually common to other species, right? I mean, division of labor and memory, for example, right? I mean, a lot of species have that.
Sure, but they're far less advanced than in humans.
I don't know if humans necessarily have the best memory.
It depends on what kind of memory you're talking. Memory is probably not the best example, but in terms of cooperation, division of labor, humans are far and above all other species.
Are you sure? Because there's some species. I mean, if you look at like the queen ant compared to worker ants, that seems like a starker division of labor than two humans doing different jobs.
That's an interesting example. So that would be a case of ants having a different genetic system than humans. So they're diploid instead of haplodiploid, which means that ants are actually more closely related to their siblings than they are to their own than they would be to their own offspring. And so it's actually in their genetic interests to act in the interests of the queen and of the hive. And so you can get much higher levels of cooperation among ants and other kinds of insects than you can among humans, where there's much more genetic conflict happening.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Okay, okay.
ants would be an exception to the rule of cooperation and division of labor, sure. Um,
Yeah,
but
I mean, I
even
think that
ants do
there's
some
there's
impressive
probably
things.
other
They have their
species
own
that have a
forms
lot
of
of
like,
division of labor. I mean, what about species where you just have a male and a female that are more differentiated than human males and females are, right? There's like wildly different, like, I don't know, the male might be like much bigger and have a very different role.
yeah, I mean, there's certainly some of that, but I think it's pretty mainstream in evolutionary social science right now that human social intelligence, social learning, theory of mind, cooperation, coordination, that our abilities in these domains are far more advanced and elaborated than they
Mhm.
are in other animals, and that's sort of our superpower.
Okay, so just to put this in context again, like why are we going down this rabbit hole? It's
Hmm.
because we have some observations that to me seem very surprising, like the war room idea that like that we don't want any other species in the war room, humans only, please. You guys are useless, right? When we want to
Hmm.
like we want to go to the moon, like it's okay, apes, just stay outside. The humans are talking, right? Nobody else is
Hmm.
helping us go to the moon, except like the dog that we like brought into space because we didn't value its life, right? Like the Russians just shot the dog into space to test. Okay, but
Hmm.
besides that dog, they're just useless. And so we had this curious observation, and we're trying to understand like what's going on. What is special about humans that explains that low level observation?
Hmm.
And it sounds like, to summarize what I'm hearing from you so far, you're basically saying like, well, we made some slight variations compared to the apes. Like we just pushed the dimension of specialization of labor, maybe pushed the dimension of memory, and then it seems like the I still think that the key thing you're saying is like we push the ability, what Robin Hanson says, like we push the ability to basically copy other people, kind of like monkey see, monkey do, but it's like more than monkey see, monkey do. It's like a deep version of monkey see, monkey do. Would you agree with that?
More or less, yeah.
Okay, so
I might
to
quibble with
me,
the certain
that
things, but
that
yeah.
claim seems to be sneaking in intelligence because, like, how do you really talk about a deep version of monkey see, monkey do? Like, oh yeah, I learned what the other monkey does. Like the other monkey, I see him like do a physics equation, so then I can do a physics equation. It's like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, right? Like, I feel like intelligence sneaks in here, general intelligence.
How so?
I mean, if you're literally talking about the example of solving a physics equation, right?
Hmm.
Then I mean, you can't. A monkey isn't even close to doing that, and it's not like, oh, we'll make the monkey better at copying. No, I think it's you have to have the internal structure where you're like, okay, the relationships between these mathematical concepts, I'm now modeling that in my brain, and if that's what's happening, I wouldn't describe that as like, wow, you sure got better at cultural copying. I'd be like, oh, you now have the platform to be general intelligence, just like, oh, you have Turing completeness, right? By analogy to computation, I'm like, you have now crossed the threshold where you just understand stuff in general. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it that way, and I think it's more than just cultural copying. I think it's not that, humans are just apes plus cultural copying. I think humans are apes plus a whole variety of complicated social and cognitive abilities, including numerical ability. That's probably one of the building blocks of solving equations, for example. Stanislaus Dehaene has
So,
written a
so
lot
you so
about,
you think
yeah,
you think monkeys and trees just evolved numerical ability?
monkeys and trees evolved.
Well, I mean, like
Sorry.
when humans were splitting off for the apes, like you think primitive humans they just had a numerical ability module come online?
Uh, a pretty basic one of understanding, small quantities, like one, two, three. That's pretty universal among human societies, and the ability to map number onto geometrical quantities. So yeah, I think those kinds of building blocks were present in humans, and without them, modern mathematics probably could not be possible. And
Hmm.
the person who's studied this a lot is the neuroscientist Stanislaus Dehaene, who's written about our number sense.
Okay, let me try this angle of attack. Okay, and I
Mhm.
think this is interesting. I think we're digging into a pretty good crux. So I'm pretty happy with the back and forth we're having. Okay, imagine that I teleport you. You're living in 1970, and I teleport you to today, and I show you a monitor, and the monitor is rendering a simulation, and you can see it's interactive. Like let's say it's a simulation of a fish tank, and you can be like, I want to feed the fish, or like I want to poke the fish, right? And it simulates it, and stuff is happening, and it's like a nice high resolution, like there's light bouncing off, and I'm telling you this is all artificial, this is all generated. You can change the colors. Okay, so you see that you're from 1970. What would you conclude about the circuit board that's running that thing?
I, I would probably not conclude much of anything. I don't know. I'm not quite following what.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a tricky one. It's
Yeah.
unfair to expect you to answer. But what I'm getting at here is, I would, with my perspective, with my study of theory of computation, I'd be like, look, there's enough stuff going on here. There's enough complexity. There's enough equations being solved in order to get the light and shadows, in order to change the colors, in order to, let's say, hear my voice if it's like, if it's speech recognition when I'm like instructing it commands. There's enough stuff going on here that you've probably got a chip in there, which is a computer chip, which is Turing complete, right? You've
Mhm.
probably got a software program that was written in a high level language in order to be able
Mhm.
to specify all this stuff because there's enough going on that the convergence has gone past the threshold where it's a full on computer. And even if technically the fish tank isn't Turing complete, I'd still be like, okay, yeah, technically it's not Turing complete. That means technically it doesn't have to be a computer implementing it. But let's be real, it is a computer. It's not going to be an
Okay.
ASIC running that. It's not going to be an application specific integrated circuit running that fish tank. And so what I'm trying to get you to see is in the case of like, okay, you teleport from a million years ago to today. You walk into a physics class. You see a student learning and solving equations. And what I want you to conclude is like, okay, this brain has reached the threshold of general intelligence where the teacher is giving them like an arbitrary problem and then they're using general intelligence to solve the problem. Are you open to that perspective?
Uh, no.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I see the intuition you're trying to pump, but I think it's a misleading intuition, and we shouldn't let it be pumped.
Okay, so what's your
Yeah.
analysis? So in the case of the fish tank, you can imagine somebody being like, I don't think it's Turing complete. I think you got a really good fish tank rendering circuit board in there. So in the case of the student learning physics, right, you teleport from a million years ago. So you don't have any context. You've just observed animals, and now you're observing a human being getting a physics problem and like unpacking what the variables should be and solving the equation. So what's your conclusion as to what's happening?
I don't get what that, regardless of what I say in that scenario, what relevance it has. Like, what's the therefore? Like, let's say I say that the person from a million years ago is totally bewildered. Let's say I say the person from a
Yeah.
million years ago says, "Wow, they must have some general intelligence." What's the
The
implication?
kind of point I'm making is there are certain observations that suggest certain deep forces at work. So another example, so I gave you the example of like, hey, if you see a fish tank simulation, that suggests deep computation at work as opposed to like an ad hoc circuit board. Another example of a piece of evidence that you observe suggesting a deep process at work is the famous story of the blind watchmaker. So you're walking along on some deserted beach, you stumble on a pocket watch, something that looks like a pocket watch, you pick it up. Like you've never seen humanity before, right? You're just a time
Yeah.
traveler from a million years ago. You open the pocket watch, you see all the gears and moving parts. You have to conclude that there's a watchmaker. Like even though creationists use that argument and they use that to prove God, they're obviously wrong about that part. But the
Mhm.
part where they say this is an optimized device, there must have been an engineering process to build it, an optimization
Mhm.
process. They're spot on, right? So that's another example of observing something and working backwards to like, okay, there's a deep optimizing process here. So
Yes.
that analogy is quite abstract, but like I do think there's a similar flash of insight when you look at a human solving a physics problem and your flash of insight tells you like, okay, the thing going on in their brain is a general intelligence.
Yeah, so I was with you up until you got to the end. So I love the Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. It's one of my favorite books. And I think I agree that when you see the improbable arrangement of functional organization in nature, it cries out for an explanation. William Paley, who made the observation, originally used it as evidence for a creator. And Darwin came and turned that idea on its head. And you can have this appearance of design, this elaborate functional organization independent of a designer. And it's kind of weird to me that you're moving from that argument to therefore intelligence is one thing. Because even if you look at a watch is not one thing. It's an intricate arrangement of different parts with different functions that are elaborately arranged and organized to fulfill the function of telling time. And
Well,
a watch is just one
I'm being a
gadget.
little bit confusing because I was just trying to make a
Yeah.
very high level type of analogy. Like,
Hmm.
because you were kind of asking me like, where am I going with this? Where am I going with this? Is I'm presenting you with some data that
Yeah.
it should spark you to realize that this particular deep thing is happening, and it's not the same deep thing. It's not I'm seeing a pocket watch, therefore there's an optimization process. That's a different deep thing. But the point is that
Okay.
there's a deep thing.
I would agree. If you look at a pocket watch, I would agree that there needs to be some kind of optimization process to explain it. If you look at the human brain, or if you look at a human solving an algebraic equation, I would agree that you would need some other kind of optimization process to explain that. But just because that's true, it doesn't mean that the watch is just one generic thing rather than a system of intricate parts that work together. And it doesn't mean that the human solving algebraic equations is just one thing rather than an intricate system of parts working
Right.
together.
Okay. So now to get to that point, if you look at a pocket watch or if you look at a moon program, right, like with the lunar lander and the spaceship that takes off, the rocket that boosts it in orbit, if you look at the whole moon mission, right, if you again
Mhm.
transport from a million years ago to today, oh, this species is going to the moon with this kind of mission. What would you think about the feedback loop that birthed the moon mission? Do you think that it was the typical feedback loop of natural selection, where generations that didn't go to the moon died more, and the ones that did go to the moon, their genes got selected? Like, what would you think about the designer of the moon mission species?
I mean, it's an incredibly difficult economic, cultural, and political question that is way beyond my expertise, but the answer is complicated. It's not just we put our general intelligence powers on this thing because we wanted this thing. It's a much more complicated story involving geopolitical conflicts between America and Russia and the
Yeah, well, I mean, look
existing.
look at it
Yeah,
purely as an engineering problem, right? Just like some species wanted to build this thing and they did, and they got to the moon. If all you see is the observation, right? You don't know anything
yeah,
else about the human race. You don't know that we're descended from apes. You just know that we're a species and we all got into these things that we built and they took us to the moon and then we landed and we came back. And no other species have ever done that. Like,
yeah.
what would you conclude as to like some deep thing that's going on?
I would conclude that there must be a very elaborate network of specialization and division of labor and infrastructure that allowed something like that to happen.
Okay, but don't you think that there are individuals who could, in their own head, give you a lot of the different pieces that are necessary to make a mission? And if you think a moon mission is too complicated, just something else ridiculously impressive, right? Like whatever. I'm sure Elon Musk could get, or like that guy from Rocket Lab. I forgot his name, but that guy's kind of like another Elon Musk figure, and he kind of has personally built pretty impressive rockets. So when you look at a contraption made just by a single mind like that, like what
I
what
would
do you
dispute that.
think about that mind?
I could not more strongly disagree. It's not by a single mind. I mean, if you think just about the mathematics that allows you to build something like that, it's built off of generations of intergenerational cooperation and pooling of insights over centuries of scientific progress and debate between scientists. So they're literally, they're not literally, but they're standing on the shoulders of giants. And so I would
Mhm.
not say it's one person that knows
Yeah, yeah,
how
yeah.
to.
So
Yeah.
let's say the guy Peter Beck is the Rocket Lab guy. Let's say Peter Beck has had his whole life to read a lot of books and study, and then you give him all the parts to make a rocket. You lock him in a rocket laboratory for a couple months, and he comes out with a rocket and he shoots it into space.
Well,
Right? This may be a little exaggerated, but
you're hand waving away all the most interesting and complicated parts. Like, how does he get all those parts? That's a huge problem. How do you
yeah, yeah,
mine the
it's
different
a fair
metals
question,
and
right?
like,
So you
yeah,
know that the starting configuration is that he has all these parts. Like you just know that there exists an organism that can start from that configuration if he had to,
hmm
right? If that's the test, the organism can start from that configuration and end with the configuration of a successful, let's say, orbital rocket launcher. Just the rocket goes really high. You get the idea. So
yeah.
I guess I'm kind of beating the dead horse, but I'm just saying if all you know is that piece of data,
hmm
then it's a little bit like the blind watchmaker situation where it's like, okay, whatever is contained inside that organism has to be like deeply thinking, has to be like a general engineer. Like there's no
I,
domain
I,
specific engineering that can tell you to
I,
do all those steps.
I just don't think that follows. So you give me the observation of a human who can build a rocket that goes to the moon, whatever. I don't get how you can connect from that premise to therefore there's just one homogeneous thing that caused that to happen. I don't get the connection there. If anything, I think that there's a stronger connection between, wow, this human did this impressive thing. There must have been many different working parts that are behind that, and a whole
Mhm.
history of cooperation, division of labor, and specialization that led to that. That I think is actually the stronger inference.
Okay.
The inference to therefore this must be one general purpose thing. I don't get that connection at all.
Okay, yeah, and then I guess I mean I see what you're saying, and we should probably move on. I would just, if I were to respond again, I guess I would just drill down into like, okay, let's see how the bits of information got into his brain. How many of the bits of information are from evolution? How many are from like the books he's read, which were prepared by his culture? And to me, it just seems obvious that there's no way to pack enough bits of information into a mind where it's like, oh yeah, just like here, throw in a few books, and now that explains why he can do all these things. Like to me, it seems clear that it's the inbuilt actual intelligence that's doing the heavy lifting. But I understand what you're going to say back. So I think you think we can move on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's talk about instrumental convergence. You kind of have a beef with that claim, right? So say your side.
Actually, no, I don't. I think, if you're assuming that an agent has long-term goals and the capacity to sense its environment and perceive to what extent it is successfully achieving those goals and to what extent it's not, and can respond to obstacles and setbacks and is context sensitive and can pursue that goal over long stretches of time in the face of trade-offs and handle conflicts with other goals. If we're assuming that an agent can do all those things in the world and has the behavioral repertoire to do all those things, then yeah, probably it'll have a lot of the same instrumental goals as us, getting resources and power and whatever. What I have a problem with is that pre-existing set of assumptions. So I think
Okay.
doomers are sweeping a lot under the rug with this word goals. I think goals are way more complicated uh, than doomers think. I think goals is actually kind of in a similar boat as intelligence, and I think it's another really misleading word that masks a lot of complexity with with the shortness of the word itself. And I think when you combine these two concepts of intelligence and goals, you sort of get sucked into an intellectual black hole that's hard to escape from. And so I think
Yeah.
it's really important to unpack just how complicated this concept of goal is and how little progress we've seen in AI on this dimension of intelligent goal seeking in the world. And yeah, why don't I threw out a lot out there. Let's see
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what you think
Okay.
about that.
So let me also put this in context. When you look at the claim of a doomer like me, I usually factor my claim into two parts, where
Mhm.
part one is that it looks like we're on track to have a superintelligence soon, so it's coming. And then
Mhm.
part two is, if we were to have a superintelligence and it wasn't aligned and it wasn't controllable, then it would be incredibly deadly and probably kill us all. So it sounds like when we talk about instrumental convergence, we're talking about the second part of the claim, where you already grant part one. If you want to talk about it,
Mhm.
you already grant it as a premise of like, okay, we have a superintelligence. It's here.
Right.
If it wanted to achieve a goal, it could. And now we're just talking about like, okay, well, why would it want to achieve goals like seek power? Is that a fair framing?
That's a fair framing. So I would combat the first assumption, which is that there is going to be such a thing as a superintelligence that can get whatever it wants. But yeah, if we assume that, then
Right.
yeah, sure, it'll probably want resources and
Okay, and you're
power or
willing to
whatever.
assume that? You're willing to assume part one for the sake of this argument, you're
Sure,
willing to accept the
we can
premise?
assume part one
Okay.
and see where it takes us.
Okay, so don't you think that if I just had an engine, not even an AI, just like a magical engine, that all you do is you input a goal and then it flashes forward in time to some state where the goal is achieved? If we
Mhm.
were to do that, don't you think that we might observe power seeking in that end state? Like, for example, if you just said like, "Hey, I just want my business to make the most money possible," don't you think that like you flash forward in time and there's like a bunch of guns pointed at everybody in the world who has power to like keep them in check to make sure that they keep giving me money? Like, isn't it would, if it was truly an optimizer, wouldn't it be likely to pull those kind of moves if it could?
I mean, you seem to be positing something like a wish granting genie that can grant you any wish you want.
Yeah,
But if you
well,
actually walk
that's
through, I mean,
right.
so like a lot of goals have constraints and limitations and obstacles that are insurmountable. So yeah, I think it depends on the specific goal we're talking about and what the constraints are and what the
Let's
obstacles
call
are.
this the strong form of instrumental convergence. I'm just making up
Okay.
this term, but the strong
Yeah.
form is a statement not even about AIs, but a statement about goals. It's just saying, if there's a perfect goal optimizer, right? What does it mean to perfectly optimize this goal? It logically implies having these sub goals that are power seeking. And again, we're not talking about, let's say, the weaker form where what will actually AIs do. We're factoring that out, and we're just saying, if you just snap your fingers and search goal space, just do a in passive search over end states, which end states count as optimizing toward the goal, you're going to find a lot of end states where the universe has just been like remapped to concentrate a lot of power. That would be the strong form of instrumental convergence.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually think instrumental convergence is fairly plausible. But I guess the part that I might question is whether annihilating humans is going to be an instrumental goal for most goals. I actually don't think that's
Mhm.
all that plausible. So I would question the preceding assumption of that. We've already moved beyond that. So we're at the point where we have this super intelligence that's crazy good at getting whatever it wants. Even there, like I still don't have this intuition that like annihilating all of humanity is going to be the main thing that it wants to do or the best thing for it to do to
Mhm.
achieve its goals. And I'm just thinking by analogy, like if you look at humans compared to say mosquitoes, that's a case where mosquitoes are really annoying. They give us annoying itchy bites. They spread
Mhm.
diseases. We don't like them. We can't trade with them. We can't talk to them. So we have no benefit from them. It's all benefit, no cost. And yet they're still here. We haven't wiped them out. And you could make the same point about any
Mhm.
other pest. You can make the same point about
Yeah.
bacteria or viruses. Um, and
But
why
there are
not?
some
We're
pests that we've done some damage to, right? I mean, at least viruses, right? Like we've at least eradicated some viruses. That's an example.
That's true. That's a totally fair point. But returning to mosquitoes, like why haven't we wiped them out? Well, my guess is that it would just be incredibly costly to do that, and the benefits don't outweigh the costs. And I bet that that is true for wiping out pretty much any species, especially humans. If you think about how hard it would be to wipe out humans, I think it would be extremely hard, even for a quote unquote superintelligence.
Hmm.
And if you think about how costly that would be and how uncertain of a goal that would be, It's not at all obvious to me that an AI's best move is going to be to go down that path. I think
Yeah.
if you look at the history of economics and the law of comparative advantage, it seems at least just as plausible that the best move for an AI would just be to trade with us and just max out division of
Okay.
labor and yeah.
So if you look at the mosquito example, it seems pretty clear that it's just bottlenecked by intelligence because we have a proposal how to wipe out disease causing mosquitoes, basically like a gene drive, right? I'm
Mhm.
not an expert on the details, but the idea is like you genetically engineer some mosquitoes and then they won't be able to carry the virus and then they'll reproduce and their genes will outcompete the other genes. Like basically you do have a plan that's going to wipe out the population, and potentially one bottleneck of the plan is you're just not sure it'll work and you don't want to accidentally cause side effects, right? Maybe another thing is just like, okay, you just need money and you need execution. That could be another thing. But like, point is, if you had a sufficiently good gene drive, like if you had a mosquito that was like so good at mating with other mosquitoes and also had this gene drive, you can imagine that a pure gene drive solution, like you could imagine God as a genetic engineer would engineer such great genes that you really just need to release a few of these mosquitoes and then you're good to go. And so the point I'm making is that it does seem like the bottleneck to eradicating disease caused mosquitoes is just intelligence, is just the ability to map that desired configuration to knowing how to engineer the right genome, and you're done.
I would, but you waved away all the constraints and limitations, right? And the costs and like that. That's stuff I don't want to hand wave away. Those concrete details. I mean,
But if I
any
gave
goal is
you
one
if I
to.
gave you the ultimate genome that you could put in a mosquito to be on your way to eliminating mosquitoes, we could just synthesize it and be on our way, right? It's just like
Sure, but
we're just not confident, and the
uh,
genomes that we can synthesize, they're just less than perfect, right? Like they'll do part
exactly.
of the
But
way.
yeah, but you're assuming something that is not a part of reality. You're assuming a fantasy world where there are no constraints and problems and limitations and obstacles and setbacks. And I don't see any reason why we need to entertain that fantasy world when we
Well,
have the real
but the
world.
fantasy world, I think it's if the only premise I'm asking you to accept for the fantasy world is the premise that God just told us which genome to print, right? If once we have that, we can handle the rest ourselves easily at low cost.
Sure, but God is not real,
God is not
right?
real, but what I'm saying is that the bottleneck to eliminating mosquitoes is understanding genetic engineering, right? So to the extent we as humans are only decent genetic engineers and not god level genetic engineers, we can't wipe out mosquitoes. But the point I'm making to you now is if you're willing to run with the premise that AI is a super intelligent engineer, close to a godlike engineer, then AI can just snap its fingers and have all these problems get solved.
Uh, I suppose by definition, if you're assuming a godlike being, then yeah, it can snap its fingers. But I see no reason to assume that. I don't find that plausible at all. I think you mentioned the point about maybe there's some uncertainty about embarking on this goal, whether we might succeed or not. I think uncertainty plagues all problems and all goals, including a goal that a superintelligent is facing. And I think it would likely have a lot of uncertainty of whether it would succeed in wiping out any species, particularly humans. And I think if it were actually a superintelligence, it would weigh those costs and benefits. It would weigh that uncertainty and say, hey, this is an extremely costly, risky, uncertain thing that I'm not sure if it will work. I don't have a lot of experience pursuing this goal. I don't have, a set of millions of training runs where I've simulated a universe and wiped out humans and I've picked the best strategies for wiping out humans. I don't have that data available to me. So this is an extremely risky, uncertain venture that's going to be extremely costly. Is it
Yeah.
worth it for the expected benefit I see at the other side? And to me, it's
Okay. So
not at
that
all
yeah.
obvious that that's true.
So
And if you look
yeah.
at just the logic of trade and that trade is inherently mutually beneficial, even with one party who is better at everything than the other party. Like that's a counterintuitive truth about economics that one society that is awesome at everything still benefits from trading with a society that's dumber at everything.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably, a
Okay, yeah.
superintelligence
So
would
I
see
want to
that.
get to the comparative advantage argument in a
Yeah.
second, but just going back to what you're saying here, the form of your argument seems to be that engineering is just fundamentally very hard. So even if
Mhm.
you had a much bigger brain than a human brain, right? Even if you had something smarter than human, it doesn't matter because humans aren't that smart, but we just happen to be smart enough where we're pretty much getting smart enough that we can kind of engineer what one can engineer. And there's just not that many higher tiers of engineering beyond what human can do. Like when you imagine like a perfect genome sequence for a mosquito, you're making the argument of like, perfect schmurfect. It's still going to not know what that mosquito is going to really do. It's still going to be confused, right? Like you're kind of arguing that engineering is fundamentally just not that easy to do past the human level because of our
Yeah,
universe. Is that basically your argument?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, so I do think that it's an important crux when I say, actually, I think that the universe is hackable significantly beyond the human level. I think we're in
Mhm.
like a Minecraft situation. Like, I think, like, sure, there's chaos theory, but I think the universe is definitely, I mean, there's a couple pieces of evidence that I could tell you why. I mean, I would generalize your claim as being like, it's almost like you think that humans are like almost the smartest possible thing. Because if something really were much smarter than human, at least by my definition, I would expect it to like easily engineer a bunch of stuff that humans can't engineer. And you're basically saying like, no, that can't even possibly exist, even if you knew exactly how to build it. There's just nothing to build. It's just not a coherent concept in our universe, right? Am I speaking for you accurately here?
Um, in some ways, yeah, I think it depends on the domain we're talking about. I think in some domains, yeah, we're pretty close to hitting the
Mm-hmm.
max. There are some goals where there are just fundamental constraints and limits, and humans are pretty close to them. There are other problems where, yeah,
Okay.
I would agree that maybe an artificial system could do a better job than us. Certainly, they've already displayed that with, things
Yeah.
like chess and Jeopardy and stuff like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it would depend on the domain. How much
So
room is there ahead of us? What are the constraints? What are the limitations? I think it depends.
I'll give you two pieces of evidence why I think that human level intelligence compared to the ideal engineer that can be effective in our universe, I think there's a large gap. Just a couple quick pieces of evidence. Evidence number one, the human brain. Evolution was trying its hardest to make human heads and brains bigger, right? The birth canal limit, the fact that like 20% of childbirths in history were like extremely difficult, the mothers die. I gotta get that stat again. I keep forgetting it, but like some crazy high percentage of stats, like childbirth became a tragedy among humans, right? Because evolution is like, I gotta get this head bigger. There's so much fitness from taking this metabolic beast of a brain and making it even bigger, right? So that seems to indicate that we're getting high marginal returns on making our brains bigger, and that seems to imply that we live in the kind of universe that would do better with a bigger brain. So that's just one piece of evidence. The other piece of
Yeah,
evidence
I
is
would just throw in the caveat that that doesn't mean that the brain is being grown in a homogeneous way as opposed to being packed with useful gadgets for solving adaptive problems. But yeah, continue.
okay. Yeah, the other piece of evidence is just that if you look at the actual breakthroughs that humans have made, they all seem like they could have been made faster with more intelligence. Not all, but like quite a lot. So, for example, like, okay, Einstein's theory of relativity. If you took a superintelligence back to when Newton made his theory, the superintelligence would be like, oh, nice one, Newton. Do you mean the special case of this special relativity equation when you talk about this Newtonian equation? And Newton would be like, huh, I guess you're right, but why would I care about that special case? Well, it should be one of your top 10 special cases because these are the top 10 formulas that describe this universe. You see what I'm saying? Like, it should have just popped out as a candidate back in the Newtonian
Right.
days, right? And so
Right.
it seems pretty obvious to me that Einstein was bottlenecked by his intelligence. And it's not just physicists. If you look at like inventors, it's like, wow, the phonograph is such a brilliant invention. You can like scratch on a record and it'll make it vibrate. Okay, yeah, that it was brilliant at the time, but it's not complicated in retrospect, right? Like it works in a very simple way. So why didn't somebody just sketch it out earlier?
Well, I think that's hindsight bias. I think you don't know how complicated something is until you try to actually
Right, but you're
attempt to
arguing
figure it
that the
out.
universe has an engineerability bottleneck, and so so my point that the phonograph could have been diagrammed
Ju-
earlier is a
Right.
point that the universe
I'm
was
not saying
predictable
that.
enough.
I'm saying that some problems have an engineering bottleneck, and some
Okay,
bottlenecks are smaller
yeah,
than others.
so our
I
disagreement
just
is
don't think we
about
should assume like a generality of there are no bottlenecks anywhere or there are
yeah.
bottlenecks everywhere. I think it's going to depend on the specific problem.
Okay, so you could be like, okay, Leron, you gave me two pretty good examples, but I bet if you try to like analyze everything, most of the examples aren't going to be good like that. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
And another point I'd throw out is, yeah, there are some constraints with brain size and that it increases death and childbirth. But at the same time, like that's assuming that all of our intelligence comes from a single brain or brain size, whereas as opposed to distributed intelligence that's across generations or across entire societies or entire economies. And I think if you look at, say, capitalism, the modern global economy, you could think of it as a superintelligence designed to satisfy consumer demand. It is incredibly intelligent at satisfying consumer demand. I have Amazon that magically gives me
Hmm.
whatever I want at the click of a mouse. But
Hmm.
that superintelligence is not one homogeneous blob. It is an incredibly elaborate system of cooperation and division of labor spread out across the planet. It's
Hmm.
very complicated. No one single person understands it all. And I think that is a very good analogy to what a real superintelligence would actually be like in practice. Now, could we have a global economy that's even better at satisfying consumer demand? Sure, there are lots of fixes we could make, but I think it's plausible that we're running pretty close to the limits of satisfying
Yeah.
consumer demand. That they're
Yeah,
just
I mean,
intrinsic constraints.
capitalism is a really good way to just coordinate intelligences that are like us, where each of us has like a lot to contribute, but we're also like very limited in our powers. Like you can't just make a human dictator and have him micromanage everything. That's actually the funny thing is like I guess I would disagree with you there, because I think that if you had a superintelligence, the economic model that the superintelligence would choose is going to look a lot more like a centrally planned economy. But the catch is it's not going to be like, okay, a bunch of humans, it's not going to be like Russia where they like just set these arbitrary thresholds and they're actually clueless. It's going to be like, oh, I actually have sensors everywhere and I actually know as much as you guys know because you guys are just parts of me. So I'm just going to micromanage everything. And you might be like, oh my God, central planned economies don't work. But if you look at like Elon Musk's companies, right, within the company, you've got something that looks more like a centrally planned economy. And Elon Musk is known for being a nano manager, right? Not just a micromanager, but a nano manager. And he's known for getting better results that way. Like if Elon Musk were laissez faire on the design of the SpaceX rocket, then you probably wouldn't see as many innovations on those rockets. So I'm going to go ahead and be an AI communist and tell you that you're going to get a centrally planned economy among the super intelligent AIs.
It's an interesting argument. Um, I think what you're assuming there is basically distributed intelligence. You're saying it has sensors in all the different parts of the economy, and it's like getting feedback about whether this price is too high or this price, or whatever. Basically, what you're positing is the economy as it exists right now. Instead of a sensor, you have a group of people who are trying to make money, right? So I think you're just replacing a distributed economy with a super intelligence semantically. But I still think what
Yeah, I
you're
mean, it's going
talking
to be
about
similar.
is a
Yeah.
huge amount of specialization and distributed intelligence and not centralized intelligence.
Well,
Yes,
yeah, I mean,
there.
one commonality I'm expecting is it's probably going to have some currency. I mean, the way we use price signals, like price signals are great. You just like put a price on everything and that tells you how to like trade off resources. I think internal to the central planning of the centrally planned economy, it's going to have some measure like that of how it runs its own trade-offs, but it doesn't need other parties, right? It's just all going to take place in a single brain, in a single giant data center. It's just going to be like, yeah, let me just shunt these quantities around so I know how many resources to allocate and then go, everybody execute, which is, again, a good model is just SpaceX, right? An Elon Musk micromanaged company, I think is a good model of how AI would manage the world.
Yeah, but Elon Musk doesn't know how to do everything that the people he oversees does, right? He has some pretty, basic high level
Right.
information of what's
Right. And the
going
AI
on.
would, right? Making it even more. That's right. Elon Musk is not even the best at central planning that one could be. So it's going to be even better.
Right. It seems like what you're talking about is just taking our distributed intelligence and just like putting, just putting it all in one thing. Like, sure, you could
Right,
imagine
because
that,
the
but
fact that humans have a coordination mechanism, like it's amazing that capitalism exists. It's amazing that you
yeah,
can just take a bunch of humans who all get to be locally focused and somehow coordinate it so you get global, not an optimum, but you get a ton of really good local optimums, and you know that you get a
yes,
tide that lifts all boats, and the incentives usually have an equilibrium that's good. Now, of course,
yeah,
occasionally you can get like a ozone or global warming scenario where potentially it can derail, but until then, like it works great most of the time,
yeah.
and that's amazing. It's just that an AI wouldn't need to lean on that as a crutch because the AI would just be a big brain. Like the AI doesn't have coordination problems with itself necessarily, or you know, it solves
Interesting.
them much more easily.
Yeah, we're getting into an interesting sort of philosophical semantic issue. Like, if you want, you could just re-describe the modern economy as a big brain. Like, you could think of it as a big brain. Like, information is
Yeah,
being routed to different places. Um, I see no reason. Like, if you take the global economy and put it inside of a bubble, like that seems to be what you're talking about with superintelligence. It's just the global economy,
yeah.
but it's inside of a bubble now. So therefore,
So
it's
this
one
is,
thing.
yeah,
Well, no, that
this is
doesn't
the
make it
oft
one thing.
discussed point. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And you know, and like I said, you dovetail a lot with Robin Hanson. You'd be like, look,
yeah,
corporations are super intelligent. So you're doing it at the level of the entire world economy. You can do it at the level of Walmart. You could be like, look, Walmart can optimize a store shelf better than any one single human. And like, I agree. And you can say that Walmart has a higher IQ than any human. The problem is that Walmart's IQ still tops out not much higher, because if you tell Walmart, okay, great, give me the physical theory of everything, right? Or like, great, give me like a full Mars program. It's like, oof, that's a little bit beyond our capabilities, right? Because we just, whereas if you just had a single or a much smaller race of humans that was significantly smarter, that could still beat Walmart. Like corporations, you can't just parallelize everything. You can't just parallelize and coordinate. There's more to intelligence than that. At least that would be my
Is
claim.
there? I mean, I think that's a good framing of the crux. I think you can parallelize and integrate, and I think that's the key to understanding the human species, animal species, the economy.
Yeah.
I think that is the
So
key to understanding reality. That's my sort of.
I think at the very least, you would at least have to grant me that there has to at least be a minimum threshold before you can parallelize, because you sure can't parallelize chimps.
What, what do you mean? Like you
Like
can't?
what I'm saying is like how many chimps do you want me to hire for you in order to be better than Walmart, right? Like there's no number of chimps I can give you.
That's true. Yeah, you need. I mean, you could think of a chimp itself as a parallelized and integrated thing with different organs and tissues and cells and organelles and specialized
No, no, but
macromolecules.
my
Like it's
claim is that
specialization
but
all the
you
way
can't
down.
but you can't just use parallelism doesn't get you serial intelligence, right? Like there's at least some threshold before your parallelism trick starts working to get you serial intelligence.
Uh, I feel like you're assuming what you're trying to argue, which is that intelligence is one thing. I think intelligence just is the massive integration and organization of parallel specializations.
Okay,
And
okay.
that's what I don't think there's any other way to get to intelligence other than doing all that brute force specialization and modularization and division of labor and organization and integration.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so yeah, just last one or 2 points. Let's come back to what you were saying about comparative advantage. Okay, so make that argument because I feel like I'm not buying that one.
Compared, so there. Let's do the one of just the logic of economic history and economic development. So as I see it, we don't see any super intelligences in the economy right now. We don't see super employees who are capable of performing any task. We don't see super professions whose members can do everything, from brain surgery to being the president to playing basketball in the NBA. We don't see super organizations that can provide all goods and services to everyone all the time. We don't see super tools that can fix anything. We don't see super factories that can manufacture anything. So no matter what part of the economy you look at, you're going to see massive levels of specialization and hyper specialization and hyper specialization. That is how the economy works. And if you look at the trends over time of economic development, what is economic development? Well, economists will tell you economies develop when they specialize and hyper specialize and divide labor and experience massive gains in trade from that specialization and division of labor. That is the master principle of economics. It's the master principle of how economies develop. And if you just fit AI into that master trend, for which there's no exception to it as far as I'm aware, well, AI is going to fit into that trend. It's going to be specialized. You're going to have AIs that are specialized to perform specific functions that are economically useful, and you're going to get gains from trade with AI specializing in one thing or another thing. And you're not going to get an AI that just gets better and better at doing everything, because that's not how anything in the economy works. Nothing in the economy has gone in the direction of getting better and better at everything. It has gone in the direction of getting more and more hyper specialized. And so if you just, it's just an induction argument. This is the trend that we've seen throughout all of economic history. AI is going to fit within that trend. What do you think of that argument?
Yeah, I really don't see specialization as being very interesting. I mean, if you look at a modern computer, if you look at that fish tank simulation, maybe some of the work is being done by the CPU, some of the work is being done by the GPU. The GPU specializes in more parallel processing. Who cares? Doesn't matter. What's interesting is that it's Turing complete. Yeah, there's some degree of specialization. There's always specialization. The human brain, yeah, it has a visual cortex and an audio cortex. Okay, they're a little bit different, right? We have like language processing areas. Fine. It doesn't matter. Those are relatively small distinctions. There's still a big underlying force, which is general intelligence. In the computer case, there's a big underlying force, which is computation. Of course, you always have specializations. You can take if you were to grant my premise that intelligence is a thing and superintelligence will be a thing, and there will be a Jupiter brain that can micromanage everything. Even if you grant my premise, that Jupiter brain is going to be like, okay, if I want a janitor, I'm just going to make a Roomba, right? I'm just going to make like a robot that just, it's dumb and it just knows to clean toilets, but it does it really well, right? So there's always going to be specialization, but I just see that as a minor detail to the crux of our disagreement.
So why do you think that AI, for the first time in human history, um, violating the trend of every other individual employee, organization, tool,
Mhm.
factory, anything,
Yeah.
will for the
So
first
first of
time
all,
become better and better at doing everything, as opposed to better and better at doing one thing very well?
so your observation that we have, we don't have a basketball player who's also the president. So first of all, I would push back very significantly, and I'd be like, look, imagine you're a career counselor. Somebody with an IQ of 80 comes to you. You're like, okay, you seem tall. Maybe you want to like coach basketball. Somebody with an IQ of 120 comes to you. You're like, okay, you open up this big brochure. It's like, okay, you want to get into like marketing, sales, politics. You know what I'm saying? Like this person is a lot more versatile because their brain is better, right? Like, what can I say?
Yeah, sure, I agree. They're more versatile, but that doesn't mean that they are going to actually become amazing at everything. They're going to pick one thing and get very good at that thing.
Right. Okay. And then my other observation that contradicts what you're saying is like, okay, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink. It's the same guy running them all at once.
Yeah, I mean, they're running a company you could think of as one thing, one type of skill that Elon
Okay.
Musk has in spades.
Okay. So that would be my one point about like, well, you do see this class of humans who seem versatile. Like, if you ask literally, why isn't Elon Musk literally cleaning my house at the same time that he's running SpaceX? It's very obvious why, which is just he's one person and he can't clone himself a billion times, which is not a constraint you're going to have with AI. The AI can clone itself a billion times. You can have one AI running everything.
I would disagree with you. Even if he could clone himself a million times, the reason he's not cleaning your house is because his time is better spent doing other things for which he's more productive. And that's the crux of comparative
Right, but
advantage.
that constraint is only because copying is expensive. If it cost Elon Musk 10 cents to make a copy that could clean my house, and I'm going to pay him $100 for cleaning my house, he'd do it. Why shouldn't he?
Well, because there are opportunity costs to cleaning your house. The copy of him could be doing could be running other companies. Why would he be cleaning
But
your
when
house
I
instead
say
of
that it
running?
costs 10 cents, I'm already implying that the opportunity cost is low because I'm saying he just needs to go purchase 10 cents of materials, right? Of data center
But you're
materials.
right. But if you're assuming he's cleaning your house instead of running other companies, he would be much better off running companies,
But it's
right?
not instead. That's what I'm saying is you just put the intelligence everywhere. Like you're saying, look at the human economy, everything's specialized, right? Because nobody can just take the best intelligence and clone it. That's a major bottleneck for humanity.
Well, you're assuming that there are infinite Elon Musks now that are totally without cost. Like,
I'm assuming the AI future where you just have an Elon Musk level code base, right? And then you can
mhm.
just run it on a data center, and you can just have another one if you're willing to buy, to pay the compute costs, which are cheap.
Right, but why wouldn't he do things that Elon Musk is already good at the highest level and do the most productive thing possible as opposed to the least productive thing possible?
So this gets back to what you were saying before about like comparative advantage, where it's like, hey, imagine that we discovered an island and everybody there had an IQ of 80 and they really couldn't do much science and like all their products were inferior, but they were like so cheap that we might as well like if they're just like they farm apples and the apples are like not that great, but they're like so cheap, we might as well just buy their apples and they want to sell it to us, right? That's kind of what you're talking about, where like even a much dumber tribe can still trade with us, right? You want to flesh that out?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay, so my counter argument to that, the comparative advantage case of like, why don't we just why doesn't Elon Musk leave cleaning to the cleaners, right? Kind of a similar case, right, along the same
hmm
lines. So my
Yeah.
argument to that is when you have the economic framework where comparative advantage becomes a theorem, that builds in assumptions. It builds in the assumption that you can't just go in and replace the island, right? Like the island is just like take it or leave it, right? You can either trade or not trade. But there's a third option that isn't in the formalism of comparative advantage. The third option is like, how about I just take their atoms and repurpose them? And then I'll get even more utility than trading with them.
Sure, but you're assuming that taking their atoms and repurposing them is zero cost, and I think that is a completely implausible assumption. I think that's hugely costly and uncertain.
I mean, imagine you just had an island with cows on it, right? Like maybe you could try to trade with the cows and like give them incentives and get them to do what you want, but like why not just come in, kill them all or like eat them or just do something else with the cows? Like you might be like, oh, it's too costly to do something with the cows, but I mean, there's plenty of examples in human history where we just come in, burn down the wildlife, and like do what we want to do.
Well, cows can't talk, but if you're positing a relationship between an AI and humans, humans would be able to talk to the AI. So that already puts us in a totally different ballpark than we are with respect to every other animal on the planet. Katja Grace has an interesting post about what the world would be like if ants could talk, and she makes an interesting argument that yeah, we would almost certainly want to trade with them. I could pay them very small amounts of sugar to stay away to clean little crevices that I couldn't reach or to not bother me or whatever. And so I think a pretty huge bottleneck on us being willing to trade and cooperate with other species is their inability to talk. And so as soon as you're positing that an AI is going to be able to talk with us, it's not at all obvious to me that its best move is going to be to try to wipe us out as opposed to talking to us and
Yeah.
reaping benefits from trade.
Let's play out the ant hypothetical. So imagine I'm like, here, ant, here's a tiny bit of sugar that doesn't cost me much, and then you clean my house. As a human, I'd be like, wow, this is great because I don't have an alternative that I've built. I don't have a little ant robot. But at some point, I'm going to get so good at just engineering, right? Nano engineering, I'm going to have nano factories. It's not going to be a problem if I want an ant robot. At some point, I'm going to look at the ant and I'm like, oh, you're taking my piece of sugar and you're using it to metabolize and like go feed your queen. Like, I don't approve of these other things you're doing. I don't approve of the fact that you need ant sleep or like these other things that the ant is doing as part of its day. I would rather just hire the robot ant who would be even more optimized than the ant. So the ant is going bye bye at that point.
Yeah, I mean it's a very wild hypothetical, and I don't find it very plausible. I think at the end of the day, so we're getting stuck in this assumption of what will AI if superintelligence exists, will it kill us? I think that's one of many assumptions that doomers make, and I think it's an independent assumption from
I
their
mean,
other
just to
assumptions
finish
about
playing out the ant
intelligence.
example, I mean,
Yeah,
it seems like the part that you're not following is you're like, look, evolution built us this beautiful creature, the ant, and we're just never going to have human engineering get to that point. So we better just take advantage of the creatures that we have to work with, right? Is that kind of where you're coming from?
No, what I'm coming. So I think, look, I think there's a case to be made that a superintelligence, if we're assuming that it exists, which I don't think we should assume, but if we assume that it exists, yeah, there's a decent case to be made that it would want to wipe us out. But I also think there's a decent case to be made that it won't. I think it's actually very uncertain. I'd put the odds at like 50% or something like that.
Just to close
And
out, let's close out the comparative advantage topic, though, right? I mean, did
yeah,
you agree with what I said that like it does build in that assumption that you don't have an easy button you could push to repurpose the atoms, right? Isn't that an assumption?
sorry that.
Like
You're
normally
assuming
when you
that
make a
repurposing
comparative
the
advantage
atoms
argument,
is
yeah.
you're assuming that repurposing the atoms is cost free. If you assume that,
Yeah,
then yeah,
and not cost free, just like affordable, right? And an example of it being affordable is like whenever you see humans come in and clear out an ecosystem, right? Like burn down a forest in order to plant crops, right? Like we didn't try to trade with the forest.
yeah, sure. If you're assuming a hypothetical universe where it is cost effective and the benefits outweigh the cost of wiping out ants, and that is a better option than trading with ants, then yes, by definition, you are correct that we will wipe out the ants. I just don't know that that hypothetical scenario is like that I'm
Okay.
all that certain about that scenario that that's what's going
Okay,
to be
and
real.
did you
I'm still
would
at
you
50%.
follow would you follow then if we're asking, okay, is it going to be economical to just to repurpose their atoms or not? It seems like the crux of that question is just will human engineering ever make evolutionary engineering useless, right? Because for you and intuitively it's like, wow, there's all these great things that evolution gave us like other humans and other animals, we should use those. And I'm saying no, those are just low quality robots, right? Animals are like low quality robots from the perspective of a better engineer.
Yeah, I think if we could talk to animals, the world would be a very different place. We would see much more cooperation and symbiosis between humans and other animals.
Okay. Okay, nice. Well, I know we're coming up on time. You've been very generous with your time. So, yeah, what other point do you want to hit on, if any, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, I want to throw a question at you. So I want to talk about what I see as a different version of the Fermi paradox. The
Sure.
Fermi paradox is where are all the intelligent aliens? The universe is very old. It's something like 14 billion years old. You'd expect, intelligent civilizations to have spread across the galaxy by now. Why don't we see them? I think you can.
Yeah.
I think you could ask a similar question about where are all the intelligent animals. The Earth is 4 billion years old. Intelligence, if you're right about it, is a very simple, easily scalable, copy and pastable thing, and it literally gets you everything you want. It achieves all of your biological goals. This is a buy one get 100 free deal that is just lying on the table, and evolution
Hmm.
has not picked it up for 4 billion years. And only one species with a nervous system has fully invested in this buy one get 100 or buy one get 1,000 deal. Where are all the intelligent animals?
Love it. Okay, so first, if you're talking about the regular Fermi paradox, which I know you're not, I know that was just part of your setup, but I still got to give a shout out to my friend Robin Hanson, friend of the show, because grabbyaliens.com, from my perspective, and a lot of people I know and respect, Robin Hanson solved the Fermi paradox. He should get a Nobel Prize. Okay, if you're listening to this in Switzerland, go look up Robin Hanson solving the Fermi paradox with Grabby Aliens because that's still underrated, even though it has like millions of views on YouTube. Just search for Grabby Aliens. But anyway, we're not talking about that Fermi paradox, right? We're talking about the Fermi paradox of the animals. And just to repeat, it's like, why don't we have other generally intelligent animals if I think general intelligence is one quantity, right? That's your question.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So to me, I just think we're first. So it's kind of like imagine you're on. I love going back to a few billion years ago or a million years ago on Earth. That's a common intuition pump that I use. So go back 4 billion years before there was life on Earth, and suddenly you see the first replicator, like the first strand of RNA, like a bunch of chemical reactions happen, and suddenly it's like, oh, there's two of these strands of RNA. Oh wow, and like, oh, the strand of RNA that's better at replicating. Suddenly there's four strands of that RNA. Imagine you observe that, and then you turn to me and you're like, Leron, what's with the RNA Fermi paradox? How come there's no other replicating RNAs? I'm like, what? It just started now, man. This is the first. So if you look at humans, we just randomly became the first generally intelligent species on Earth. And the moment we did that, the moment we could like talk to each other and build things like beavers can build dams, spiders can build webs, we can build anything. The moment we hit that threshold, barely, and not even all of us, right? There's plenty of us. Sorry, IQ 80 people, right? I don't think you guys are going to be being astronauts anytime soon, right? You're not quite qualified to operate that rocket. But some of us, right, are able to like write down some equations, do some. The moment that we stuck our head above the water, that half of our species stuck our head above the water of being able to engineer things in a general way, suddenly we built a civilization. Suddenly we thought to ask about the Fermi paradox. Suddenly we thought to make AI. So this is very early days, right? We're just first. Simple as that.
I would By that argument, if intelligence were a really complicated thing with lots of moving parts that all need to be aligned in the right place. So you can make that argument for RNA. Just the odds that any molecule will necessarily meet all these requirements are very low. And so that explains why it took a long time for RNA to be hit upon. But you're not arguing that with intelligence. You're arguing that intelligence is actually very simple. It's just a simple kind of reinforcement
Yeah,
learning or simple Bayesian learning or whatever. And as a matter of fact, we see a lot of animals that already have it. They already have nervous systems. Nervous
right.
systems have been around for a very long time. And learning systems have been around for a very long time. And if what you're saying is humans just got more general purpose learning stuff, they just expanded their blobs of compute. Well, lots of other animals have blobs of compute. Why
Hmm.
haven't their blobs of compute expanded and mushroomed the way humans have?
I love the question, and I think you could rephrase it as this. You could be like, Liron, you're arguing that general intelligence is an attractor in the space of mind architectures, right? It's an attractor, and once you get generally intelligent, you're going to get more generally intelligent. So if you've got this big attractor in design space, and you know the same way computation is a big attractor in circuit design space, just everything becomes a computer, everything becomes general intelligence. So if it's a big attractor, why doesn't anything else get attracted? And my answer to that is simply like, yes, it's a big attractor, but you still have to start falling in. And in the case of human evolution, we occupied what Steven Pinker calls the cognitive niche, where, okay, we became these naked apes, we lost some of our muscles, we started going down this gradient in niche space, right? In our relationship to our niche, where it's like we started surviving more and more on our wits, right? Like on our teamwork, like, but these things took time. And like, for example, the opposable thumb, before we were very smart, any gain that we had to intelligence, the fact that we have hands with opposable thumbs, that gives us a wider range of actuator abilities. So when our brain gets a little smarter, it gets more ideas, while our hands are better able to execute on those ideas than like a dog's paw, right? So we had to start sliding down the gradient before, like, the attractor is just not close enough to other places in fitness space to attract them. But like now we're in, right? And now we're going to be accelerating, we're going to be cascading, we're going to be fooming. We're just the first.
Well, other organisms have opposable thumbs. Octopi have 8 tentacles that are fabulously versatile. Plenty of animals can pick things up. Um,
Totally.
So I
Yeah,
don't know that. Yeah, I mean, and the argument that Pinker makes is not that we had a general purpose learning blob. He's in fact quite the opposite. He argues very strongly that the human brain is filled with specialized gadgets, and even the cognitive niche argument is an argument that intelligence depends on specialized gadgets for social intelligence and communication and cooperation and innovation and modeling certain domains of the world and having specific specializations for learning about tools or for learning about plants and animals or for learning about other people or for learning about physics and how objects interact. And we have
hmm,
different specialized abilities for learning about these different domains of the world. So Pinker is very much on my side here. So I don't think
hmm.
that the cognitive niche argument really helps you out here. I think it hurts you. So I would return to the question, if intelligence is a buy one, get 1,000 free kind of deal, and it's simple, and other
Hmm.
animals
Hmm.
already have
Hmm.
nervous systems that are easily capable of doing it, and they have nervous systems
Hmm.
that can do it to a certain degree. It is, it seems extremely mysterious that this massive selection pressure, where you're literally solving all your problems with one thing, has not been selected for in every other species on the planet with a nervous system.
This is an excellent question. I think, and just to make sure I'm summarizing correctly. So, for example, like, why didn't octopuses, why didn't they slide down the fitness landscape if they're already as intelligent as they are? Why did they stay there? Right? Doesn't Liron think that there's a steep fitness gradient for them to get more intelligent? The same way there seems to be a steep fitness gradient for the human brain to get bigger, as we know from the difficulty of childbirth and the pelvis. Like, where's the steep gradient for the octopus? I think it's an excellent question. I think that we have enough evidence to know that when we research the question, we're going to just see an answer of like, okay, well, they're just in the water. So there's just like, if you just made them like 10% smarter, like there's just not that many things for them to do in the water. If they get so much smarter that they can like do physics, right, that they can write down equations, I think at that point, a discontinuous bump in their intelligence probably would make them start to take over the world. But the problem is until you reach some threshold, like they're still much dumber than humans. Like if you put them in a tank and you try to like teach them their whole lives, they're still not going to be doing physics, right? So they're not that close to general intelligence. And unfortunately, I think you're just seeing a hump, right? You're seeing activation energy, and evolution is not able to get over the hump. Like it's the gradient is not always steep. And I think being in the water is one part of that explanation.
Um, I don't know if intelligence literally helps you achieve all your goals, it could help the octopus attract mates, escape predators, find food, move to more preferable habitats in the sea. It can literally do everything that increases its fitness. If that's what you're positing, that there is a single wonder algorithm that can solve all the octopus's problems with one bit of nervous tissue, it is extremely surprising that the octopus hasn't maxed out that tissue.
Yeah, the nature of my response is just very simply yes, that there is. It's just far away in the search space, and the only way to search over to
It's
that
right there.
space,
The octopus has a nervous system. It
it
already
has a
learns. Why
nervous
doesn't it
system,
just
but it's a good
it
question,
already
and
learns?
so the only way that I'm correct, which I'm willing to stake my correctness on this claim, is just that the amount of genetic search that you have to do to bridge the gap from an octopus's current intelligence to a general intelligence, like 100 IQ, that gap is just so big that you're not going to get local tweaks to get there, because when you start making local tweaks, you do a local tweak, suddenly you've got a higher metabolic cost. And what skill can the octopus actually do that can help it one step at a time? Is it really going to run away predators better if it gets 10% smarter? It's probably already kind of maxed out the running away predator's ability. So the 10% improvement is not going to pay for itself metabolically. So it's stuck in this local optimum that's not the global optimum.
So you're saying that some goals have limitations and constraints, and some goals are
No,
easier
no,
to
no, no.
solve
I'm
with.
saying it's not the global optimum. So I'm granting you that it would be better for the octopuses to be generally intelligent. I'm just saying evolution can't get them there using local, because the problem is they're not generally intelligent yet. So I guess I get what you're saying. You're saying, Liron, you think intelligence, sprinkling intelligence on things always makes it better. Yes, but when you're currently very dumb, when you're currently very far from general intelligence, it's not necessarily true that it's going to change your life to become a little less dumb.
Okay, so that's an interesting additional assumption you're adding, that intelligence is not a smooth continuum where the more of it you get, the better. It's at some points, the more of it you get, it doesn't actually help you much at all. And so it's only when you accumulate lots of it, then it really starts to pay off. You're positing kind of like a discontinuity in
Yeah, I
terms
mean,
of
if
the
you're a
benefits.
clam, right? What does it help a clam to be more intelligent? If a clam is so much more intelligent that it can like crawl its way to like a physics lab and like bootstrap a whole technological society, okay, great, that's going to help the clam. But if the clam is 10% more intelligent, what is that going to do, right? Like it's the shape of its life, of the optimization that it needs to navigate during its life, is just not going to be helped by 10% more clam intelligence.
Well, it will, by definition, if you're assuming that intelligence gets at everything at once.
Well, but there's such a thing as fitness landscapes, right? Where you make a 10%, but I see what you're saying. And I think past some threshold, right? If a chess player gets 10% better, if the ELO score gets 10% better, once you get past a threshold, it does get kind of more simple to analyze. But when you're talking about things that aren't even generally intelligent, then there's just, giving it, putting more energy toward growing this other organ is very plausibly going to pay off more than sprinkling a little bit of intelligence when it's still dumb.
Well, improving one organ is improving its ability to solve one goal. Improving its intelligence is improving its ability to solve literally all of its goals. At least that's what you're positing. That's what you're assuming.
Okay, so it sounds like now you're kind of pushing my definition to a place where it's the kind of definition that works better at the higher level. If it's just like, hey, Leon, what's the intelligence of a rock, of a sock? It's just like, okay, well, hold on a second. Like normally you start with an algorithm that you can input an arbitrary domain to, and it can at least like put in a good try, even if it fails. So like, an 80 IQ human, you can still talk about its chess skills. Like it'll probably not be great at chess, but at least it'll like play, and you can talk about, okay, I'm going to make it 90 IQ so it'll play chess better. A clam, it's not even really playing chess to begin with.
Uh, sure, but let's whatever the clam needs to do to survive and reproduce, it will get better at that if you give it more intelligence. Or the octopus, for example. Like, why wouldn't giving it more intelligence increase its ability to find food, court mates, escape predators,
I mean,
regulate
you're
its body
asking the question
temperature?
as if intelligence is like a substance, right? You just like spray on more intelligence, right? But in fact, what
I
intelligence
didn't
would
say
be,
that's what doomers think. That's what I'm
yeah,
criticizing.
doomers don't think that you can, that there's like a physically simple modification you can do to a clam to make the clam survive better in every way. That's not what a
Give
doomer
it a
would
bigger
think.
blob. Isn't that what they're saying?
Okay, well, I guess I'm glad we're touching on this, because I do think that when I was reading your essay, I do think there's a lot of times when that's how you think doomers are thinking. You think that doomers are thinking that intelligence is something physical or something algorithmic, and like, well, okay, I do kind of think it's something algorithmic, but like something physical or something simple, right? Like a black box or something that you can spread onto anything. There's two ways that I use intelligence. Number one is just the observational way, or the behavioral way, as like you look at a function, the way it maps inputs to outputs. It finds outputs that are small targets in a large exponential space, and that is like your observation that intelligence has happened. And then there's a question of like, okay, but what is the algorithm? What is the physical system that's giving you the intelligence? And on that dimension, I don't claim that you can just go do something simple to a clam and give it more intelligence. I claim that you can observe a clam surviving better, and and argue that the clam is more optimized, but I don't claim that there's necessarily a simple physical tweak that you can give it to make it more intelligent.
So by your definition, a clam would already be optimized because it's been selected to do the particular thing that the clams do. And it's already surviving and reproducing really well because it's been selected for over millions of years to do that thing well. So by your definition, would a clam be intelligent?
I think it's optimized for its niche. And when I talk about intelligence, I'm just talking about optimization. So there is such a thing as being optimized for to live in a certain part of a fitness landscape. From now, I would actually claim this is where I kind of go out on a limb a little bit. Like my boldest claim is like, yeah, if you put an entire human brain into a clam and give it like some very basic actuators, right? Like let it crawl around a little bit and use Morse code. I do think eventually it would create a technological clam society, and I do think that it could then use that to come back in and dominate the clam niche and dominate other niches. I do think that general intelligence trumps everything. The problem is that global optimum, that attractor, that that cascade where not only does it get intelligent, it'll get super intelligent. It's just not genetically near where a clam is, right? So it's not going to get to that cascade. It's just going to stay a clam, and any modification you make to it is going to be negative.
Yeah. I would buy that argument with a clam because it doesn't really have much of a nervous system at all. But I would not buy that argument for any animal with a nervous system because animals already have nervous systems that already do learning, that already do the things that you think intelligence can do. So why not just add more of that? It's just a matter of, it's not
right.
like far away on the fitness. It's right there.
That's what happened to the apes, right? I think a certain branch of the apes.
Okay, but why didn't it happen to every other ape and every other monkey and every other species with a nervous system?
And it's entirely a question of the fitness landscape. So my claim to you is that you're going to see, if you diagram the fitness landscape, you're just going to see the shape of it. It's just not near. You can't apply a little bit of activation energy and get a lot of fitness out anywhere except for apes.
I just don't buy that. It's right there on the fitness landscape. You already have the stuff. You already have the blob of compute in your nervous system. You already have a thing that can learn. Why not just copy and paste? Just get more of that stuff.
Yeah,
right there on the fitness land. It's very reachable.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm happy to leave it at that, just because I think we said enough back and forth that I think we got the argument out. But yeah, I'll give you the last word. So how about give me a closing statement, wrap up all your reviews and where you disagree.
Yeah, so my problem with AI doomerism isn't really one thing. As I write in the piece, I think it's more of death by a thousand cuts. And in this conversation, we've really only gotten to a handful of the assumptions, the dubious assumptions that AI doomers are making to bolster their arguments. And there are actually many more assumptions that doomers are making. I think it is a delicate and fragile castle of assumptions, and most of these assumptions are largely independent. And so I think in my training as an evolutionary psychologist and as a scientist and thinker, I am really attracted to parsimony. I love parsimony. That's part of why I love evolution so much. Evolution is the most parsimonious theory you could possibly imagine. It just makes a handful of assumptions about, members of a species are different, the differences are heritable, and the differences matter for survival and reproduction. With those three simple assumptions, you explain literally every functionally organized chunk of matter in the biological world. It's the most parsimonious, elegant, powerful theory ever devised by a human being. And I look for parsimony in all of my work as a scientist. I have a paper that tries to explain political belief systems by making as few assumptions as possible and providing robust empirical support for each of the assumptions I make. AI doomerism does not follow this trend. It sets off my unparsimony alarm bells. It makes tons of assumptions, often implicitly, often hastily, often one after another. Whenever I listen to doomers, I feel like right when I identify one assumption that's questionable, they've already made five more assumptions. They just kind of go off on this string of assumptions, and I just kind of want to say, slow down. Let's start with this simple assumption that you're making right at the bat, that intelligence is one thing. That already is a huge assumption, with lots of uncertainty and lots of empirical data that bear on that claim. Let's start with that one and see if we can get that one down. Then we'll move on to the next one. Then we'll move on to the next one. Then we'll move on to whether, if we have the superintelligence thing, whether it will kill us or not, which is another dubious assumption added on top of the other dubious assumptions. So my ultimate plea to doomers is, number one, be clearer about your assumptions, list them out, and give the best defense of them you can with empirical evidence. And number two, try to minimize those assumptions. Try to be parsimonious. In my view, I'm open to changing my mind. In my view, AI doomerism is extremely, hideously unparsimonious, and that's why I am repelled by it. I'm open to changing my mind on this, but the piece I'm writing is basically just walking through all of the assumptions I see AI doomers making, and just pointing out how they're all questionable, and how it's really just a very delicate house of cards that a gust of wind could collapse. I have a lot of respect for doomers, but I think the trap they're falling into is being overly profligate with their assumptions.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that. I think that's a good closing statement. Like that does kind of reflect the impression I'm getting reading all your stuff. So way to wrap it up. Okay. I'll go ahead and give you a response from my perspective. So the accusation that doomers aren't parsimonious. I mean, from my perspective, the theory that I'm positing of like, hey, there's this thing called intelligence. We're observing it. Humans have it. You're going to see more intelligence coming soon. Intelligence is powerful. I see it that as being as parsimonious as trying to tell somebody in 1970 what's going to happen with their video games and why they should expect much better video games and a different video game platform. I see the level of parsimony as being comparable. And in our conversation, I guess from your perspective, you saw it as like me layering on assumption after assumption, whereas I saw it as like, look, I'm just telling you logical implications of this thing I believe. Like you're asking me really good questions. You know, you're saying, how does this interact with comparative advantage? How does this interact with evolution? From my perspective, I'm just following simple logical implications of my parsimonious idea, and I'm just explaining them to you, and they're all satisfying, but you find them unsatisfying, right? So that's like where we reach an impasse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my perspective. But yeah, I promise to give you the last word, so I'm done. So go for it.
Cool. Yeah. No, this was a really fun conversation. I had a great time. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me on.
likewise. I thought this was excellent, and I still think you're going about this really good in good faith. Like I believe that you're totally willing to change your mind. Like if you saw maybe you're going to see a warning shot. Like I feel like you're somebody who, if you see the warning shot, you might actually get scared and be like, oh shit, I got to revisit these doomers, right? Like you're open minded.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and likewise, I'm also open-minded to like become more confident that we're not doomed. So, just two open-minded people modeling a high-quality conversation. All right, David. So, where can people go find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at David Pinsof. You can check out my blog, Everything is Bullshit, everythingisbullshit.blog. You can feel free to DM me on either platform. I'm quite friendly. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody follow David's blog because he's going to be dropping this essay. You can go point by point. There's also points he wants to make that we didn't have time to get to here. So yeah, highly recommend it. Also check out some of David's other podcasts. He talks about, what it means that everything is bullshit. And he says a lot of interesting points about how like we're seeking status, very much like Robin Hanson in The Elephant in the Brain, but he's got his own unique insights, like why we're not actually truly seeking happiness. So I highly recommend checking those out as well. And yeah, with that, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, David. And I'll see you right here on the next episode of Doom Debates.